This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by OWC, Carl Tatz Design, Jay-Z Microphones, Spectra 1964, and Isotope. You're hearing my voice right now through the Jay-Z pop filter on the Jay-Z BB29 microphone in a Carl Tatz designed room through the Spectra 1964 STX 600 mic pre-complimenter and Isotope RX and Ozone, all recorded safely onto an OWC Mercury Extreme Pro 6G SSD. So get ready to rock.
Programming MIDI for me is always counterintuitive because it's like it's adding imperfections to a perfect thing. You know, you record the drum groove, you quantize it, and then you select all of that MIDI information and humanize it a little bit so that it's slightly off. And it's so weird to think of it that way, that it's taking something perfect and adding the imperfections that make it musical.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shah, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. No matter where you like to rock in the galaxy, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron lets you record with confidence over USB-C with up to more than a gigabyte per second of real-world performance. Transfer tracks in seconds and take your sessions with you anywhere you go. Built for reliability, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Find the Envoy Pro Electron and all your OWC storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. I used to have an expensive pop filter for my vocal mic that was so fragile, I had to put a sign on it warning singers not to touch it or else the thing would break. But not anymore. Now I've got this super durable pop filter from jzmic.com that sounds fantastic. I don't have to worry about stuff breaking and can focus on making music. Go ahead, grab my pop filter. I dare you. Use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS and get 20% off the amazing pop filter at jzmic.com. Howdy, Rockstar. Are you ready to discover the secrets to making your mixes sound professional no matter what your studio situation? Then check out my free mixing course, mixmasterbundle.com, where I show you how to get pro-sounding mixes in your DAW using simple techniques and free plugins. And when you're ready for more advanced studio skills, then check out Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can learn from Grammy-winning teachers to help you record, edit, mix, and master your best record ever. Use the code ROCKSTAR for 10% off for a limited time. Hey Rockstars, it's your host Lid Shah, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is Raag Sethi. Raag is an award-nominated producer, bassist, and guitarist from, let me see if I can say this right, Ahmedabad.
You got it, yeah.
In India. Also the founder of Compass Box Studio. He's been instrumental in promoting indie music talent in Gujarat and India through the Compass Box live sessions on YouTube, as well as through his studio, Compass Box Studio. Raag's work has been featured on almost every major music publication in India, and he's had the opportunity to work also as an associate music producer with Clinton Cerejo, if I'm saying that name right.
Yep.
A.R Rahman, and has also worked with Grammy-winning engineers for his projects. His work has been nominated for the Best Pop Production Track at the Production Music Awards in London. And by focusing on one-take live recordings, Raag and his team at Compass Box Studio have created high-quality production within the limitations of live recordings. His production work ranges from singer-songwriter to jazz to neo-soul, rock, and many more styles. Also, I want to give a big shout out and a thank you to Ryan Earnhardt at Creative Sound Labs for making our introduction. Please welcome Raag Sethi to Recording Studio Rockstars. Raag, are you ready to rock, man?
I'm ready to rock.
Raag, it's great to have you on the show with us, man. Thanks for joining us. And this is definitely the first time I've ever done an interview all the way to India.
Well, hopefully I'll do a good job representing us Indians on this side. And thank you so much for having me. I mean, I've heard so much about your podcast and the YouTube channel. So I'm really honored.
Well, I mean, hopefully I'll do a good job of representing us over here in East Nashville, Tennessee. So have you ever spoken to anybody in Tennessee before?
I don't think I've spoken to anybody in Tennessee. Yeah, I don't think so. I've been to Texas, I've been to California and New York, but that's about it. I think that's the extent of my experience in the United States.
Okay, so you've traveled here some.
Yep, yep. I went to college in Chapman University in California, in Orange County. So 4 years of my life was in California, which arguably has the best weather in the US, but that's up for debate.
Yeah, I've heard that like that region, San Diego particularly, is
Oh
known for
yeah.
really great weather.
Hmm.
It's not great weather in Nashville today. No, we're still in the middle of a ice and snowstorm, even though this will come
Oh
out
Lord.
midsummer, so it'll be nice and warm by then. But yeah, for those of you who are just cooking and it's too hot, you can just imagine the snow and ice here, and you'll feel like you're cooling down. So tell us a little bit about Ahmedabad and where you are. What is that part of the world like? How do you like to explain it or describe it to somebody like us here?
Yeah, I mean, India is a pretty unique place, geographically and culturally as well.
It's a little bit
We
big,
have
right?
It's huge. I mean, I know it looks tiny in the map, but we've got the second largest population in the world. We are known as like the largest democracy. We've got over 1 billion people over here, and the biggest kind of music industry we have here is like Bollywood music, and I mean that's what people know India for, is the Bollywood music, like all the dance
Yeah.
numbers in songs and stuff. So that's kind of what people know of. But India has a surprisingly thriving independent music scene that's come out, particularly in the last year during the COVID pandemic, and yeah, it's just an interesting place. And because we have so many different kinds of languages here in India, we have a lot of regional production houses and studios producing music, and we have like 24, 25 official languages in this country. So
Wow.
it's really interesting to see music across states, and how, like, if you were to go from Nashville to North Carolina or to New York, you'd still be speaking English and you can communicate fine. But that's actually not the case in India. If I went from Gujarat, which is where I'm from, to Tamil Nadu, which is a different state, they speak an entirely different language there. So
Wow.
there are these really strange experiential differences between states. We've got different cultures, different foods, different languages. So all of those contribute to the music generation in this country. So it is a very interesting place, I think, to make music and listen to music.
So I know we're in a time where there's not much, no live music going on, and hopefully by the time this comes out, things will start feeling a little different. But
Mhm.
I think of the U.S. and I think of being able to travel from state to state and tour as a band and how much fun that is. Does that exist where you are in India? Is there sort of the ability to just kind of hit the road and do a road trip and go to different places, or is it a little bit is that a little tougher with the different languages?
For the most part, it's fine. Last year, I'm in a band called Heat Sync as well, and last year we did a 20-day tour around India, and we played in, I think, 11 or 12 different cities. The only problem with India is that you can't really drive to these different cities like you can in the US, right? You can totally take a road trip and sort of drive down from one state to another, and because you've got freeways and interstate highways, and
Yeah.
it's you've got a really good infrastructure for that. In India, it's a lot more complicated. um, if you were to go between Ahmedabad and Mumbai, which is roughly 250 miles, that'll take you about, I want to say, 10 hours to drive. So we typically have to fly. We don't really have an option. So it's a little expensive to tour around in India, because you kind of have to fly to venues you can't drive down.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of venues opening up in India dedicated to hosting independent music and original music specifically, because India has a very big commercial music culture.
Uh-huh.
So most musicians kind of earn money through playing weddings or corporate gigs where they're expected to play a lot of covers. But in the last, I want to say, in the last decade or so, there's been this very conscious attempt to, have more platforms and venues to support original music, which is pretty awesome, I think.
Yeah, that's great. And then when you tour like that on an airplane, does that mean that there always has to be sort of a backline rig at the gig? So they've got drums for you, they got guitar amps, and you just bring your guitar with you?
That's right. Yeah. So we have to take our keyboard and guitars with us, and the backline has to be, full PA system, guitar amps, drum kit. So I think that's the difference. I remember I gigged a little bit when I was in LA. I was a bassist for a band over there when I was in college, and I remember like when we used to go to perform at a venue, we played at the House of Blues at one point in LA as well, and I remember like we had to pack all our gear, all our amps and our drum kit. And I didn't understand, like, that concept was so alien to me, because in India, the expectation is that there'll be a backline for you. There will be drums and there will be amps. All you have to do is get your instruments and come. So yeah, it's convenient that way. The only problem is because it's backline equipment, especially for drums, the heads are like really worn in.
Yeah, right.
And there are scratches all over the place. So you're relying on the chance that, this backline company has just bought a brand new drum kit and you're the first person to play on it. So there's that risk associated to it.
Yeah, and plus with the guitar amps, you don't really have control over your tone in the same way. Or maybe the guitar sounds that you come up with are much more about your pedals and less about the guitar amp if you can't control that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. We typically give like recommendations. So we'll say, okay, you know what, a twin reverb, a AC30, a JCM 800, those will be like our top choices.
Yeah.
But more likely than not, they'll come with like this completely unbranded solid state amp that nobody's ever heard of. And we're trying to figure out how to get a great tone out of it. And so there's a lot of experimentation on the road. If you're lucky, then you've got a good tube amp. But chances are, I mean, you never know. That's always the problem.
Now, I know that, for example, Russia has kind of a long history of, I don't want to say hidden, I guess hidden because right. I'm just discovering it, but like there's a long history of like creating tube gear and amps and microphones, and there are Russian synthesizers and things like that. Mm-hmm. Is there a same kind of audio culture and history of that in India? I mean, I imagine there would be, especially with Bollywood there and things like that. You guys must have been building all kinds of stuff we've never heard of.
Yeah, it's interesting because like I know there was a friend of mine who had what was it? It was a Sovitek MiG-21 guitar amp. And I loved that amp. I remember playing through it and I was like, oh my God, this sounds so good. And why don't we have similar sort of, replications of that in India? And, unfortunately, we don't really have, audiophile grade or studio grade level brands that are making products like indigenously in India. Mm-hmm. That's just starting to come. There's a friend of mine in Mumbai who started a guitar amp company, and I actually have one of his amps that he's built at my studio. All tube, Indian made. It's surprisingly super heavy for so it's a 30-watt head. He calls it the Live 30, and it's got 3 different channels, attenuation on both the dirty and clean channel. But it's a 30-watt amp, and it's got I think 9 tubes in it. So. Wow. Which doesn't make sense. I mean, that's way too many tubes for a 30-watt amp, but I mean, it sounds great. So I guess we're slowly, coming across that manufacturing barrier and that technical barrier as well of like how to build good quality tube amps. So it's slowly starting to come. I know of 3 brands, 3 people in India at least making these like, very boutique, hand-wired, turret board tube amps. So it's just coming in, but it's nowhere near to the sort of level that it is in the US or even in Russia, quite frankly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, of course, the Fairchild 670 compressor is known for having a lot of tubes. So maybe mm-hmm. 9 tubes is just what we need in our guitar.
Maybe it's just right.
Now, when I think of electronics out of India, though, I do think of, there was a band called Band of Horses came into my studio at Bonnaroo In fact, I think we're going to be talking with my next guest about them on the podcast too. But they came in and they brought in, and then also a friend of mine who went and traveled in India brought this little box, and you would turn it, and it would just make the drone sounds
Oh,
from
yes,
sitars, and then also the boxes will do tabla beats and rhythms. So
that's right.
so that's pretty uniquely, Indian in electronics right
Yeah,
there.
that's it's called a tanpura. It's basically it's used a lot in Indian classical music, where there would be this drone of like a root and a fifth sort of playing together.
Yeah.
And it would be used heavily in Indian classical music, where you'd have a tabla player or a sitar player or even a vocalist, quite frankly, improvise over that one fundamental drone. So the unique thing about Indian classical music is that it doesn't really explore harmony as much as Western classical, even like Western pop music. But there's a huge exploration on melodic and rhythmic ideas in Indian classical music. So if you ever hear an Indian classical music performance, you'll realize like, oh, they're playing on one chord for 25 minutes, but in that one chord they're doing so much melodically and rhythmically, and that's why they use that particular box. It's called a electronic tanpura.
Electronic tempura. All right, cool. I'm going to have to go see if I can get one of those. Well, tell us about your studio, Compass Box Studio, and maybe even back up a little bit and just sort of tell us how you got into, give us the short version of getting interested in music and then finally starting your own studio.
Yeah. So I started playing guitar when I was kind of late to the club, quite frankly. I started playing guitar when I was 18, 17, 18. So I was pretty late by most standards.
Me too.
And yeah, I mean, you also like
also
late teens?
18th birthday. That was my first guitar.
Oh, perfect. Okay, there's somebody else in the world like me now.
Yeah.
I'm sort of excited about that. But yeah, I was like 17 or 18 when I really started playing the guitar seriously. And I went to college at Chapman University in California, in Orange County. And I majored, I initially went in to major in political science. I had no interest in pursuing music as an industry. I mean, as a profession at all. There was no sort of scope in my head that, oh, this is a viable profession, going back home in India. Because again, in India, we don't really have a band culture. We don't have, independent music culture. We mainly have this behemoth of a music industry, which is Bollywood music.
And where is Bollywood located? Is it like a specific city, right? Or no?
Technically it's Mumbai.
Okay.
Mumbai would be the home for Bollywood, and it is the most consumed form of music, which is film music, right? If you've ever seen any Bollywood movie, it's filled with dances and songs.
Yeah.
And it is those songs that people listen to the most in India. Like I think I remember reading some sort of statistics saying that up to 90% of all music consumed in India is Bollywood music.
Wow.
So it's it's insurmountable odds, right, for an indie musician to try to break through that. So there was no real motivation from my side to like pursue anything in music. I liked playing the guitar. I enjoyed it. And that was about it. And then when I was in college, I had to minor in something. So I dropped my political science major and I took up education, integrated educational studies, still nothing to do with music. And I minored in classical guitar performance.
Cool.
And while I was doing that, I realized, okay, I don't like playing classical guitar at all. I love listening to classical music. But
too much harmony, right?
I mean, yeah, and honestly, it's just the culture I didn't enjoy. I didn't enjoy the culture of, performing really well and, waiting for the people to clap at the appropriate time and, having a dress code that was so suffocating where I couldn't move well. So they were just, those were not things that I knew at that point that classical music, while I enjoyed listening to it, it's not something I wanted to continue with.
Yeah.
But the university I went to was a conservatory. So they didn't have, a jazz course, or they didn't have, a blues course or rock or popular music. So I got quickly, disheartened and disillusioned by music. So when I came back from college, I started teaching at a school. I taught English literature. I taught global perspective. So again, nothing to do with music. And then about 3 years ago, I had this space, and the thought of having like a jam room to play with my buddies was becoming more and more important to me. So when I had the space, I was like, okay, let me just convert the space into like a really, really good jam room. And in the process of doing that, I was like, why don't I just go one step further and just make a functional studio, where we can record and we can do small live performances if we needed to. I didn't have any background in audio engineering. I had a part-time job in the school as an audio engineer, but it's a really interesting experience to be an audio engineer in a classical conservatory.
Yeah.
Because I remember there's no post-processing of any kind, right? You just have to record the source as best as you can with the mics that you have.
Yeah.
And you don't touch it. I remember at one point I recorded what was it? It was a small chamber orchestra, and the levels on the gain that I had used was pretty low. So I compressed it, just so that it was a usable level, and then I gave it to my professor, and he asked me if I compressed the signal, and I was like, yeah, I compressed it a little bit so that you can hear it. And he said something that I still remember today. He's like, the dynamics should be controlled by the musician and not by the software. So he said, everything that the player plays, it's in his or her control. Your job is to just capture that. So there was no EQing of any kind. There was no compression of any kind. So if you messed up your mic positions, you messed up the recording pretty much. So that was an interesting anecdote that I still remember today, which I use in my process when I'm recording at my studio as well. Get the source right first and don't rely on fixing it in post, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
But started the studio. Again, no background in audio engineering, so YouTube was my friend. And I scoured through countless videos of, acoustic treatment and diffusion and absorption materials and, bass traps and trying to like figure out everything I could to build the space entirely on my own. And in about 8 months, the studio was ready, and I produced my first EP literally maybe like 3 months after that.
That's a great feeling, isn't it? It's a lot of fun to do your first record in your studio. With so many fantastic iZotope plugins to choose from, deciding which one to buy next could be a bit of a challenge. But did you know that now you can have all the iZotope plugins through their new affordable subscription bundles? Get Music Production Suite Pro for only $24.99 per month, or Producers Club for only $19.99 per month. Start your 7-day free trial subscription now, or go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Do you need to record direct stereo keyboards? Spectra 1964 now offers the Stereo BBDI-2 with custom-wound high-Z transformers for big headroom, virtually flat response, and a 15 dB input pad. The Spectra 1964 BBDI passive direct box is also perfect for recording deep bass that will make your mixes sound huge. Plug that into a C610 comp limiter, and as founder Bill Cheney points out, it'll move your pant leg. Get your sound moving at Spectra1964.com. Tell us a little bit about the studio. Now you have, it's a pretty unique looking room. And of course we can see it on videos, and Rockstars will include links to the Compass Box Studio YouTube channel, because you guys are doing live video shoots out of there as well. Mm-hmm. But it looks like you made a cool use of like square kind of soft carpet tiles for wall treatments. Is that right? Or am I just misinterpreting what I'm seeing?
Yeah, no, that's fundamentally right. The unique thing about the room is that it's naturally like it's a hexagon, and that just helped me in treating it better, because there were no natural right angles anywhere. So the low frequency buildup was not something I was too worried about.
Nice.
So what I did was the actual wall is made of brick. So I put in about 1.5 inches, 2 inches worth of rock wool, and then plywood pillars. And then within those plywood pillars, put these plywood panels that had this cloth and foam covering on it. And that's what you see as the square designs all over the studio. Those are all individual panels that are just sandwiching the rock wool between the wall and the fabric.
Okay, so, cool. So the panels give a soft surface, but the rock wool behind it is kind of like a low end trap behind that.
That's right. Yeah.
Awesome. And then how would you describe the sound of the room when you go in there? If you, how do you describe it? If somebody calls to say, what does your room sound like?
Yeah. I knew I did not want it to sound dead. I knew that for sure because I knew that I wanted to do some kind of live recordings in that space. And, I had been to a studio before that had like a fairly large space, but it was surprisingly dead for a large space. So when you had a full band play there, it didn't sound like there was a band playing together.
Mm-hmm.
It sounded like each of the members had their own ISO booths and they were just recording and playing together. So I knew I didn't want that sound. So it has a live sound sort of quality to it. It has some early reflections, especially from the ceiling, because there's a false ceiling on top that I had to put. But it's not dead enough where like you can't do just a single vocal recording over there and have a tight sound. So it was a compromise, I guess. I wanted to do live sessions and I wanted to be able to do proper studio overdub recordings as well. So I kind of chose the midway point and had a room that, depends on where you are sitting and playing, you'll actually be able to hear the early reflections more prominently in certain places than others. So that's kind of how I designed the space.
Okay. And then it's a room that's big enough to just sort of set a band in there and nobody's really on top of each other. And then, so you have the one main recording room and then a separate control room. Is that that's the whole studio?
Yeah, that's the whole studio. The control room is probably a misnomer because the actual control room is literally just a tiny space just where all the gear is to record. So we don't mix over there. We don't do anything, post-production over there. It's meant purely to just get a reference sound for all the mics and then just hit record.
Yeah, more like almost more like a machine room where you get the gear out of there.
That's right. It's more of a machine room. And the space is large enough. I think like the biggest live session we had done was with this artist called Ashish. And I think there was 7 of us. So we had seven people sort of playing in this one room. And the room is it's not a large room, but it's big enough to house like 7 people, including drums, to sort of play in that space. So it's not a huge room, but it's not a tiny room.
Okay.
So again,
we'll talk a little bit more about some of the challenges for you of figuring out how to build your space. Because I think, somebody here's listening and they're thinking about setting up their studio. So what were some of the challenges for you and things that you feel like, wow, we really got this right? Just share any of that stuff.
Yeah. Let me think. I think
maybe it was easy. I don't know.
No, I mean, to be fair, it was surprisingly easy. But I think it was surprisingly easy because I didn't know everything that I needed to know before recording, before building the space.
Right. So you didn't make it too hard on yourself.
Yeah. Like I wasn't an expert in sort of acoustic diffusion and acoustic treatment and, the scientific calculation of measuring the room and getting the right sort of focal point. I didn't know any of that stuff. I was like, okay, I need absorption. Oh, I know Rockwell does that. Let's just put that. That was the extent of my knowledge.
Yeah.
So I think the first challenge for me was, I guess, not getting an expert on board. I think would have been the first challenge, but I had to do that because I was working under a budget. And I think that's the second sort of challenge is that it's so important to have a number in mind when you're building a studio, because as you know, it's so easy to just rack up the bills, on things that you may need or you may not need. So I had a very strict budget for myself when I started building the studio. And in order to adhere to that budget, I had to do everything myself. I had to learn about, paneling and, wiring and soldering and, those are things that I just had to do, which was a great experience for me. But if I had the budget, I would have definitely called an expert who builds studio, for a living and asked them to come to the room and design it for me.
Well, how did you put rock wool on the wall? I mean, like, was it tricky to just simply adhere the rock wool to the wall? When you put the panels on, the wood slats, was there anything tricky about that? And then were there any details of just simply getting the mic box and the lines through the wall over to the control room or the, control room window or the door to the control room, any of those kind of super nerdy details?
Yeah, no, I mean, I had to raise the floor as well. So I raised the floor by about, again, an inch and a half, 2 inches almost. And I ran all the cabling through the floor to all the corners of the room.
Ah,
Now, typically you would have a patch bay, right? Like in one place where everything can go in. And that would have made my life so much easier. But I knew that I wanted to shoot videos there, which means I didn't want cables going all over the place, towards the middle of the studio where the videographer is going to be.
right.
So it was a conscious decision to like run all the cabling of all the XLR outs, across below the floor to all the corners. And that way you would minimize, clutter basically in the studio. I didn't want clutter. And the downside of that is that if I had to replace one of those cables, I would have to tear out the floor. There's no way around that.
Wow.
So, in hindsight, I'm like, oh shit, like if I have to maintain this or like if I have to replace something, it's going to be a heck of a job. So I had to compromise one part to achieve the other. So in the pursuit of like aesthetics and cleanliness, if something goes wrong, it's going to be a day's job.
We just really appreciate that you use the word shit and heck in the same sentence. That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I was about to ask, like, I mean, can we curse on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, this is a rock and roll show. What are you going to do?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, okay. I should have seen that coming.
So let me say that back to you. So you've got this space, you want to be able to shoot video, and you don't want it to be messy. So that means if you have a microphone and somebody, hopefully that mic line just goes right to the wall right behind him instead of like having to come across the room to get to a mic panel. So that's why you had multiple panels around the room.
That's right. And in order to do that, I had to get the lengths of each of the wires correct, because I didn't want random wires just like, coiling up below the floor either. So there was a lot of measuring required to get all those cables right. And
it's scary when you have to cut into the expensive cabling, right?
Yeah. And that was another thing that I had to figure out, was like, I didn't realize how expensive it was to just get a ton of cable. And, I completely underestimated the cost of cabling. I was like, oh, cabling, that's a sort of side thing that I don't need to really worry about. And then I realized, holy shit, that's a big amount of budget of my budget just going in cabling.
You could say it's a heck of a lot of cable.
It's a heck of a lot of cable. Yeah. And the other thing was, which I think is an often like disregarded studio essential, if I can say that, is lighting.
Right.
I wanted it to look good. I mean, like if you're going to be spending hours in there, and most of the studios that I had been to before were very clinical in terms of how they're lit and how you feel once you walk into that space. So I wanted it to feel warm. I wanted it to feel inviting, that you can spend hours over there and not feel fatigued by just the space. And, everybody who's come to the studio and recorded has always gone away with that. They've like, oh, the vibe is right. And the vibe was an important factor that I couldn't quantify as it was being built. I just knew what it was, and I just knew what it should feel like. So lighting was something that I spent some time thinking about. How do I light it well?
What did you figure out?
Fortunately, I've got two really big panels. Windows in the studio. You can see it in the videos where there's a lot of natural light coming in. So my job with the lighting was to just fill out the lighting of that natural light to the rest of the room, so that if you were to shoot at night, it would still feel very natural and warm. My lights, I also have these 4 RGB lights as well, which can kind of add a highlight of purple or blue or red in certain places in the studio where I think it'll look good. So that was a conscious decision to be like, okay, let's just get warm lights. So there's no like white lights in the studio. All of them are like what's called warm white. That's the color of the light. So that was the intention of the space, that it should feel comfortable to people.
What is an RGB light? Is that like one of those Wi-Fi bulbs where you can sort of dial in the color a little bit?
Yeah, pretty much. You can choose between sort of any color in the RGB spectrum, and you can dial in the brightness as well. So For certain of our sessions, like they're like really moody, like the song is about like, like lost, or like grief. So the lighting should help sort of sell that feeling.
Yeah.
So we have some sessions where it's completely dark, but you've got these hints of blue and purple coming in places, and that's thanks to those RGB lights. So if you're building a studio and like, even honestly, even if you're not going to be shooting videos in it, spend some time to make it look pretty, because you are going to be spending a lot of time in there. So it just makes sense to make a space that when you look around, you're like, this is a cool place,
Yeah, well, I mean, it's one of those things that I learned in architecture school, is just that anything about the space ultimately translates to the lighting. So, because the lighting is how we, close your eyes. If you close your eyes right now, what space are you in? It doesn't matter anymore, right? Because your eyes are closed, other than temperature and the air and stuff like that. So you're absolutely right. Just getting the lighting right is great. And Bobby Holland, when he was on the show, he talked about that was one of his best expenses in redesigning his studio, was to get a whole bunch of the Wi-Fi bulbs and set them up.
Right.
I'm about to do lighting in my live room, and I think I don't know if we're going to do the colored ones, but we may add those. And I've bought like RGB disco lights before,
right,
but it didn't come with a controller, so I never really understood how to control the color temperature too well.
you need a controller for that, for sure.
Yeah. The first time I heard a Carl Tatz Phantom Focus mix room featuring his PFM HD 1000 series monitors, I was completely blown away. It was like listening to three-dimensional sound with rock-solid bass all the way down to 20 hertz. It was really incredible. What's amazing is that a Phantom Focus system can be implemented in your existing control room or even bedroom studio, giving you world-class sound for mixing. Go see how cool your studio could look and sound at phantomfocus.com. Now, when you talked about raising the floor, two things. One, why did you, quote, have to raise the floor? And two, what were some things you learned about building the floor the right way, and like how would it have been wrong if you hadn't done something?
Right. So the main reason of raising the floor was the floor was made of tile, and super reflective tile. Like it's one of those kitchen tiles. So I knew I didn't want that to be the surface of my studio. And also right below the studio, there's like a library. So I needed it to sort of create some sort of barrier. Yeah.
Sorry.
So I knew I didn't want somebody coming up and doing that to me in the middle of a recording. So
we'll see if that noise I made even makes it through my mix chain. It might get knocked out and just sound like silence by the time it's done.
Just like limited heavily.
Yeah. The de-essing might just get rid of the whole thing.
Oh, the de-essing will just take care of that. Yeah. And the other reason was, again, to do the cabling. That was one of the other reasons that I wanted to raise the floor. And while raising the floor, I had to create like this honeycomb structure that supports the wooden floor on top. And without that honeycomb structure, if there's too much weight in one area, the floor will actually crack and go through.
Wow.
So we had to figure out just the right size of this honeycomb structure that can support the rest of the studio. And it had to be strong enough because, there's going to be, there are tube amps in the studio. There's a drum kit. There are going to be people walking up and down. So that had to be a non-negotiable for me, that had to be strong. So the contractors I was working with were super helpful in figuring out what materials might work and what shape might work. So I deferred to their judgment to actually create that structure and then the flooring on top. But I think it paid out in the end, because running all the cables below has just makes the live sessions that we do so much easier. So it achieved the purpose that I set out to do, where, it's not messy and the videographer can walk around without tripping on something. So
did you have to fill the floor, the space under the floor? Was that a thing to worry about, or does the honeycomb kind of take care of the sound?
I was thinking of insulating it with more rock wool. But in doing so, I realized after I did it, that if I needed to change one of those cables, I'd have to take everything out. So I didn't fill it up with rock wool or any of insulating foam, is because if I needed to change one of those cables, I would have to then, remove the rock wool and then all the adhesive that sort of goes with it and then take the cable out. So in order to make the maintenance of that a little easier, it's currently not sort of like filled in.
Okay, cool. But it's such a great idea, the idea of running cables underneath the floor. If you're building a studio and let's say you're going to pour concrete down first, one of the first moves is like run PVC piping down underneath it,
Right.
so that there are going to be these cable troughs going through the floor and through the concrete. I really wish I had that in my control room. I don't, unfortunately. So I just have cables going across the floor. Don't point your video cameras behind my console. That's all I can say. Okay, cool. So you're doing sessions in there. You've got sort of live performance sessions for video, but you're also, are you also sort of building records in single overdub fashion from, from the control room and all that?
Yep. Mainly been doing that actually. The past 3 records that I've produced, all sort of single overdubbed, studio recordings. So that's why the space is like designed the way it is, where it's live enough where if you have a live band, it sounds like there's a live character to the sound, but you can do single overdubs of like, especially for drums and for like loud instruments, the space really does like work wonders for the sound. Drums end up sounding so much bigger than they are, than the space is being recorded in. And, for vocals, we've never had any issue where there's like slap back or like these early reflections that are ruining the dryness of the vocal tracking. So the bigger the space, the better is what I've seen. Initially, there was an idea to put in an ISO booth for vocals or for something. And then when I started tracking vocals in the big live room, it just sounded absolutely fine to me. So I didn't feel the need of creating another space that cuts into my live room space. So I wanted as much space for this one large live room, as opposed to creating like one more smaller space and then having a smaller live room because of that. So everything is recorded in that one big live room: vocals, guitars, drums. So that's kind of how we do it.
Yeah. So it's smart, I think, what you said about the room being big enough for vocals. Sometimes we think about vocals as like, oh, you can be in a little vocal booth. But truthfully, the voice has got a lot of, a wide spectrum, and having a room big enough to let the low end breathe a little bit and open up can be really helpful. I did a session at the Bonnaroo Festival here for 15 years where we would take a double wide trailer and then put a bunch of soft treatment in there and really soak up, kind of make a kind of a dead room, but, maybe just a tiny bit of liveness, but not much, mostly dead. And I remember having, when Bela Fleck and Abigail Washburn came in and she started to sing and just open up, she just immediately commented, she's like, oh, my voice just gets lost in this space, you know? And that was the first time I realized that. I was like, oh yeah, you need a singer may need to have a little reinforcement. It's like recording drums in a medium-sized room where it enhances the power of the drums. If the room is too big for the drums, they just get lost, like you were saying, in some of those big studios.
Yeah. And the weird thing is, and I could be wrong about this, but like it just seems like space and air is your first sort of natural form of compression. And when you've got a larger space, the way sound behaves from a compression standpoint is very different than if you were to record vocals in a vocal booth. So it actually sounds like the air and the distance between the singer and the walls and all form your first sort of level of compression before anything else goes in, like as a plugin, So the bigger the room, I've at least found, the better it sounds.
Well, and they also say, I don't remember who this original quote was attributed to, but air is the ultimate mixer,
Yeah.
Just
exactly.
blending, and again, going back to your classical recording, if you can get things to join together musically in the space, that's going to really sound wonderful.
Right.
So you have had a chance to work with some other influencers. Let's give a shout out to Ryan, first of all. So Ryan Earnhardt at Creative Sound Labs, who introduced us. You guys had done a podcast together. I think you said you were discovering some of his videos. Now, Ryan, of course, who's also been a guest on the show, has a YouTube channel where he shows some really cool, fun ways to record things, like dropping a mic in a bucket of water covered.
That's right.
Covered. Or like, putting like 9 toms at different tunings
as a filter.
as a
Yeah, I've
filter for
seen
the
that one
drums.
too. Yeah.
So what are some things that you enjoyed seeing of his, or what have you tried in your own studio? Any fun, weird recording techniques you've messed around with?
Yeah, I mean, when I saw Ryan's channel for the first time, and again, yeah, shout out to Ryan, what a cool dude. He did this one. I think the very first video I saw of his was he was creating a reverb out of a garden hose for the drums.
Yeah.
So playing the drums, you've got this garden hose sort of like going all over the place, and there's a SM57 sort of taped on the other end, and it sounded so big for something as simple as a garden hose. So I was like, okay, I got to check this guy out. And the next video I saw was his trash can reverb. And I heard he just starts off by just playing an example of what it sounds like, where you just take a trash can, put it in the live room with the drums, and just drop another 57 in there.
Nice.
Compress it, and you've got this large stadium rock sound that comes out of 2 trash cans that are placed in the room. So I was looking at this and I was like, holy shit, this is insane. Why haven't I tried any of this stuff? Like, there's no book that I've read that says that, oh yeah, you can do something like this and get away with like huge, massive stadium rock sounds. So I emailed Ryan about it and I was like, hey, listen, I'm a fan of your channel. I love the stuff you're doing. You want to get on a podcast? And he was super awesome about it. We did a podcast together, talking about the stuff that he does basically. And it sort of pushed me to like try some of those things in my space as well. And I remember the very first thing that I had done after looking at one of his videos was room mics for drum sounds, for a drum kit. So since my space is not particularly big, adding like an Omni room mic on the corner doesn't really give you the sense of like a large room or the large space being recorded in.
Yeah.
And he suggested in one of his videos where you can take a figure 8 mic, point the null towards the drum kit, and depending on how high it is from the ground, you can, that's your high pass, depending on how far it is from the ground, because you're going to get more kick that way.
You mean put it closer to the ground and you get less highs, more lows?
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, all right, I got to try this out, and I put it way up as high as my mic stand would allow me. Put it in bi-directional mode. Pointed the null to the drum kit, so it was only getting the reflections from the panels on the sides, and it sounded huge. Nice. And after that, I started doing all my drum recordings with that as my like primary room mic. So shout out to Ryan for that. Thank you. It's really made my room sound so much bigger than it is. So yeah, that's what I did. I saw his video and I tried it. I think literally the next day I had a drum recording, and I instead of using my typical sort of 2 stereo mics for rooms, did this instead, and this has become my go-to method for room mics.
So that's very cool. And that reminds me of a buddy of mine, Brian Carter, who has Paradox Studios here in Nashville. In his old studio, which was a ranch house in Murfreesboro, there was a living room space where he would record drums. And he sort of discovered this similar technique where he'd take a pair of figure 8 mics and put them right in front of the drum kit, about 3 feet off the ground or a couple feet off the ground, one to the left a little bit and in front, and one to the right a little bit in front, spaced out. But they would be figure 8s pointing up and down from floor to ceiling, and kind of same idea. Like, they weren't so far away that it made that it sort of added a time delay on the drums, but because they were rejecting the kit right there, you didn't get as much, brightness right into the cymbals, right into the mic. It sort of had to hit the ceiling or the floor first and bounce back in. That stuff's super fun.
I also tried it with I have a Rode NTR active ribbon mic. So you don't need like a cloud lifter or anything to like boost the signal. So it's an active ribbon. And I actually mainly use that as a room mic, as opposed to like, any other sort of large diaphragm condenser with a figure 8 pattern. I end up using the ribbon more than the others, and the darker sort of quality of the ribbon removes that sort of hissiness that comes from a room mic typically. So I end up using this NTR for almost every of those figure eight pointing the null room mics.
The STX 100D from the Spectra 1964 Custom Shop is the big brother to the now famous STX 100, a fully discrete mic pre with dual transformer isolated Spectra 101 amplifiers. The STX 100D is exactly the same original circuit found in Stax, Ardent, AdVision, A&M, and Record Plant recording consoles. The sonic performance is identical. Best of all, it will plug into a single space of your standard 500 lunchbox. And if you want to add the sound of the famous Spectra C610 complementer, then check out the new STX 600 modules, combining the STX 100 mic pre and C610 complementer in a single 500 module. Now you can get that same incredible sound in your studio that worked for famous producers like Tom Dowd with the STX mic pre's, BBDI, and complementers. Go to Spectra1964.com or call 801-797-0642. One of the challenges for recording your voice is getting close enough to the microphone that you get a great bass boost proximity effect without getting blasts of wind on the microphone. Try this experiment. Hold your hand in front of your mouth and say, peanut butter popcorn. Feel that blast of air on your hand? That will cause a terrible sound on your microphone called a plosive. My favorite way to avoid this is to use the JZ microphone pop filter in front of a mic. This thing is built like a tank with a flexible metal arm that I can clamp directly onto the mic stand. It has a super cool waveguide design that looks like ripples on water and prevents the plosives getting through to the mic no matter how explosive the voice gets. Plus, it lets the high frequencies through for superb clarity on the mic. Get your vocals just right and use the limited time coupon ROCKSTARS to get 20% off the amazing pop filter at jzmic.com. Hey Rockstars, we're back now for the jam session. My guest today is Raag Sethi, joining us from his studio Compass Box in, how do I say it? Ahmedabad.
Ahmedabad.
Ahmedabad, yeah.
You got it right the first time.
I know. I have to confess, I'm cheating. I'm looking down at my notes as I say it, because I try to sound smart, but I'm not that smart. But anyway, man, are you ready to jam?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So, you have grown a YouTube channel for your studio. I think that's a great thing to do. I think it's such a smart move. It's so it's what we do now. We use tools like that, social media, YouTube. We have to tell our own story as a studio for anybody to know anything about us. That's the world we live in, even though, we're helping a little by doing a podcast now. But talk a little bit more about that. Talk about, for you, what did you discover by starting a YouTube channel? Why did you do it? What do you think you would have done differently, or what do you think you got right about it?
Yeah, so we started this channel we're fairly new. I mean, to be fair, we've only started this channel about 2 years ago. And the reason I started the channel was, so I built the studio here in Ahmedabad in India. And I was expecting to get calls every other day about, hey, listen, I'm a band. I mean, I have a band and I've got original music and I want to record this. Or a singer-songwriter calling me up and be like, hey, I want to record my next EP at your studio. And I realized I got nothing. There were no calls, there were no artists, there was no line outside my studio for work. And that's partly because, in my hometown and India generally speaking, we're not a very original music composition space. So I had created the space with an intention of producing and recording indie musicians and independent music, but there aren't enough indie musicians creating independent music. So I kind of put myself into this category without knowing how to get out of it. So because I had so much downtime in the studio, and I mean a lot of downtime, the very first year that we were operational, I produced one record and that's it.
Wow.
So there was a lot of downtime. I wasn't getting calls for independent music and stuff. I was getting a lot of calls for doing ad work and jingles and production work for voiceovers and stuff. And most studios have to do that. I mean, you have to do that because that's what ends up paying the bills. Um, but I don't know why, but I was so head set about creating an independent studio and an independent space that I didn't take up any of that work, which in hindsight I should have.
Yeah. Well,
But
and then
since there was
another
so
challenge
much,
about that is how do you even get connected to those unusual
exactly,
things like
right? When
voiceover and
you
stuff?
create a brand new space in a brand new, I mean, without any credibility behind your name, why would you expect lines of people outside your studio? You know, like I don't know why I had this sense that, oh, the studio's ready, all right, I'm going to get a lot of calls now, and nothing happened. And of
Right.
course nothing happened. But because there was so much downtime, I thought, hey, you know, I've got a couple of my friends who are also musicians. Why don't we call and invite different indie artists from around India to come to the studio to do a one take live recording, you know, akin to Audio Tree or, you know, NPR Tiny Desk and stuff. And do it for free. You know, don't charge the artist anything, and they get a single pretty much produced at the studio, fully arranged with all these musicians, with a video to go with it. You know, sounds like a good idea.
Yeah.
So that's the genesis of the YouTube channel. And what invariably ended up happening was that we started creating this small space where people around India were like, hey, you know, I saw this like video of that indie band in this random channel called Compass Box Music. And we started getting known in the indie space in India as these group of people in Ahmedabad, which doesn't have a long history in creating independent music, and these guys are doing something cool. So it ended up being like a brand, like advert almost, that look at the stuff that we're doing at the studio, live recordings, completely one take, no overdubs, no edits and compings. This is how we recorded it. This is how we played.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that ended up being a great booster for Compass Box as a brand. And you know, recently we just got featured on a list of the top 12 studios in India for independent musicians, and
Nice.
we're up on that list with like some of, I mean, the industry giants, like at least in India, like some of the studios over there have been there for like 20 years, 25 years, creating great music. And here we come as this tiny little studio in Ahmedabad for the last 2 years. So we've made our mark through this branding exercise.
Well, 2 years, one of which has been a little bit of an insane year. It's a pandemic, no less.
Yeah, to be fair.
Talk about challenges.
2020 was not the best. And we'll get to that. And because our main body of work involved calling musicians from outside Ahmedabad, right? From Delhi and from Mumbai and from Bangalore. Because again, in Ahmedabad, we don't have enough musicians making original music. So the 2020 was a particularly difficult year for us for that reason, because we relied so heavily on calling artists from outside Ahmedabad that 2020 was a downer.
Right.
And we were, the year before that, we were releasing one video a week. And then we came down to one video a month during the year of 2020. So that was a little difficult, which also allowed us to branch out to the kind of content that we would make. You know, if you look at our channel, it's predominantly just a repository of all the live sessions we've done. But recently, we decided, again, with a lot of inspiration from looking at Ryan's channel, that, you know, we have a studio, we have the space, we have equipment. Why don't we also do some, you know, studio kind of tutorials or, you know, fun things to do? So we released our first video of that category a few weeks ago, where we were comparing. We have the UAD Apollo in the studio. That's our main interface.
Mm-hmm.
So the Apollo has the Unison mic pre modeler, right, where you can model different kinds of mic pre's, you know, Manley Vox boxes or APIs and Neeves. So we did a video comparing like the same performance. So we got a XLR-Y cable, so you can have one mic going into two inputs, and we had one input with the Unison preamp on, and the other input was just the clean UAD preamp. So we wanted to see, for the same performance recorded into these two preamps, could we tell the difference?
Now, which mic did you choose to use?
So we used two mics. So we did it for guitars and we did it for vocals, and we used two mics for both. We used the trusty SM57, and we used the Aventone CV12, which is a tube condenser, right?
So that's something I want to point out, because I think that's important for the rock stars to understand. I don't think you would have been able to do that with a condenser mic, but you can do that with a dynamic or a tube mic, because you can split the signal. A condenser would have gotten confused, I think, about the phantom power.
Yeah,
I think. I could be wrong about that.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because like when we were setting up the thing, we were confused too. We were like, do we put phantom on one of the channel strips, but won't that feed it into the other channel going into the interface and like damage the interface? So we wanted to play it safe. So that's why we got a tube condenser itself, because it has a separate power supply. We don't have to worry about providing phantom, because we were unsure, and I didn't want to take the risk of putting phantom through channel 1 and it going into channel 2 into the interface, because it's a Y cable. So I was really confused about that. Do you know what would happen though? Like,
I don't know. No, I mean, and hopefully, you were going to make a great video, but it probably wasn't worth blowing up your UAD Apollo.
Yeah, I did not want to risk that. And so after careful consideration, we decided, let's not try it out, because it's not worth the risk. So we took up a tube condenser as well. So it was a tube mic and an SM57, same performance, going into 2 sort of mic pre's basically. So we did guitar, finger picking, guitar strumming, and vocals.
Yeah, that stuff's fun to do.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. And then at the end of it, we were just like, me and my friends were just listening to it A, B, and we had to identify which one was the Neve and which one was the sort of the clean UAD preamp. And it was surprisingly difficult. It was easier on the guitar examples than it was in the vocals, surprisingly, because I think that low mid range that the Neve 1073 is known for pushes that in the guitar more than it does for the vocals, I guess. But it was more prominent in the guitar examples and the clean UAD. So those were some of the ideas that we wanted to start throwing around. So the other video we're thinking of is doing a comparison between actual amps and amp sims, and seeing, for the same performance, which one is which. We have a Mesa Boogie rectifier in the studio, so we'll take the studio rectifier with an amp sim, and then again a Fender with an amp sim, and again do an A/B test. And so we're trying to think about branching out from just doing live sessions to now starting to do some sort of studio related tutorials and stuff. So if you have some cool ideas that you think will be fun, then please give me some ideas, because we're looking for them.
Fill your entire studio with a bubble machine. No, maybe don't do that. No, those are all cool ideas, and that's fun stuff to do. And I do a lot of videos out of my studio. I end up doing a fair amount of unboxing videos too, just because when something new comes in, I'm like, well, I got to do an unboxing video for this.
Right.
But I love doing fun stuff like that. And there are some unique challenges to it. One of the challenges to doing a review video of something is like, how do you make sure that it sounds right playing back in the video? Right. Or if there's a big level difference between two things, like, how do you present that where it's not going to confuse the storyline? But when you're doing videos for bands, what were some things you learned about that? Because I mean, I love that. I did a whole series called the Stereo Sessions out of my studio back in 2015. And we were doing 2 videos a week. And it was really fun. It was fun to do, but I learned a lot of lessons around that. One of which was keep it simple, right? Yeah. So what are some ways, where are the ways that making a video got too complicated for you, where you're like, oh, forget that. Let's just simplify it.
Yeah. So for the live sessions, the one thing that became super prominent when we started off was if there is a live session with the drums or without the drums, because we don't have a drum shield, for the drums. We don't have a different drum room, so the drums are being performed and played in the same room as everybody else, as seen in our videos. And especially for the vocal mic ends up becoming a room mic for the drums. That's how loud the drums are, right? And there's no way around that. Like no amount of engineering, and we try to do our best around that, placing the vocalist in all corners of the room to see where the least amount of drum bleed would be. But drums are drums, and if you've got a room that's relatively small like ours, it's going to be difficult to like get rid of that purely through audio engineering. So we had to come up with creative ways of placing everybody around, as many things as we could do direct, we would do direct. Especially like guitars. Like originally we would mic up amps every single time, but then exactly on what you just said, like keep it simple. I mean, there was no immediate advantage of like miking up the guitars, so we would go DI instead and tried those for a couple of sessions to see if that makes our life easier, and it ended up doing that. For drums, we didn't have to record snare top and bottom. We didn't need a kick in. I mean, we didn't need a kick out. A 47 fet or something like that out. We didn't need that. So we were being selective about our mics and our approaches to what really needs to be captured. And for the drums, that was the first thing to go. The snare bottom and the kick out were two mics that like we immediately discarded because we didn't need them. Hi-hat mic was another one that went because the overheads, captured enough of the hi-hats where we felt we didn't really need another mic on the hi-hat.
Mm-hmm.
So the drums were the main source for most of our time figuring out how to make it sound great and how to make it sound simple for us to record a live session.
Yeah, I would agree with you that one of the things I discovered very quickly about a all-in-one room kind of session is always start with the vocal mic. Start with the vocal, get the singer comfortable, and then find out what the other sounds are going to be like through that vocal mic, because you can't avoid it,
Yeah, and you're absolutely right about that. Like the rest of your session and the way you engineer it has to be centered around the vocalist. And that's the best way to get a balanced sound out of your live session as well, right? So there have been some interesting techniques we've tried. We did one session where it was a purely acoustic session. There was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people in that particular session. And we just recorded it. We sat in a circle. We put one Omni mic in the middle and a pair of ORTF sort of small diaphragm condensers on top. And that was it.
Nice.
And it gave such a lovely vibe. Again, I'm going back to the word of vibe, but it gave such a nice sonic vibe to that sound. And all of us go back and listen to that session and we're like, oh my God, that sounds so lovely. And so, but then the challenge again is that you need to have musicians that can do it right.
Yeah.
With a single mic technique, or like with this, ORTF stereo sort of condensers on top, you can't pitch correct. You can't balance. If you're balancing the whole mic, so everybody has to be aware of their dynamic projection for their vocals. They need to be aware of how loud to play their instruments based on it. So there's a lot more emphasis on the musician than it is on the engineer, I feel, for those kind of sessions.
So you would put a single Omni mic in the middle, and then above that put an ORTF, just kind of looking down as a stereo pair above the group. What was there anything tricky about getting the phase of those two mics right, or did you how high up would you put the ORTF?
It was pretty high, and surprisingly, we didn't even check for phase when we were recording it. It just so happens that they ended up in phase, but we should have measured them properly and actually done like a flip the phase inside and see if it's actually canceling out. But the way I sort of looked at it was that you've got this one big bubble in the middle, which is the Omni, and these two sort of higher bubbles. It's kind of like a weird like Decca tree in a way.
Okay.
A very narrow Decca tree in a way. So you've got this big bubble, which is the Omni in the middle, and you've got these two bubbles sort of on either side of that one main bubble, which are the ORTFs. So that was my thinking when I went ahead to do the recording.
It's more like they're room mics. It's as if they were room mics a little further away.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But they weren't high enough for it to like get a lot of the room sound. So it was not actually that high. It must have been maybe 6 feet off the ground at most, 6.5 feet. So those mics mainly got the projections of like the two guitarists who were sitting on either side of those mics. So that was an interesting experimentation of like, trying to do something new with miking techniques. The one thing that we realized was that since it is an Omni mic in the middle and these two ORTFs on top, you can actually kind of hear the videographer's footsteps move a little bit. So that's the challenge.
That's what Isotope RX is for.
Oh yeah. Oh my God. I mean, without RX8, we wouldn't be able to get as clean of our recordings that we do, because especially on the vocal mic, you kind of have to run the deep bleeder and the music rebalancer.
Right.
And it almost removes, like, it's incredible how good that one tool is, where
wow, so you
you've got
can
this.
you can do the Omni mic in the middle, capture everything at once, but then use rebalancer to kind of remix the different instruments.
Yeah. And in
amazing.
fact, what we also do for the rebalancer, which I don't know if that's what it's intended for, but when we have a full live session with a band, the vocal mic has a lot of drum bleed. So we actually pull up rebalancer and just, cut everything else except the vocals and then render that file. And it sounds like a dry vocal track.
That's
it's
amazing.
Incredible how powerful that tool is. So, I mean, we had to be sort of, again, inventive and creative about it. And so we took rebalancer. You've got this vocal track which has a ton of drum bleed. Like, I mean, you can't use that in a mix. So we just pulled up rebalancer. My mix engineer Pratyay is the guy who sort of discovered this. So he just dropped all those other three components, which is, I think, drums, bass, and musical are the other three sliders on the rebalancer tool, and just left vocals on top. And it legitimately sounded like a dry vocal take. So RX8 is our savior. So if iZotope, you're interested in sponsoring us, we're interested.
Very cool. Yeah, well, iZotope has been a wonderful sponsor on the podcast, in fact. And let's see here, Rockstars, I'll share this with you too. If you want to check out iZotope and these tools, go to iZotope.com/rockstars. And then if you use the coupon ROCK10, you get an additional 10% off your purchase. So that's kind of cool, right? Right here, live on Recording Studio Rockstars.
Yep, it's so worth it, guys. Whoever needs to get that, you have, especially if you do live recordings, it is a savior.
Awesome. The Envoy Pro Electron is the fastest, toughest, mini-sized, universal portable USB-C SSD that lets you record from anywhere in the galaxy with confidence. With speeds of up to more than a gigabyte per second real-world performance, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron gives you high-speed audio data for recording and playback. Take your sessions and sample libraries with you anywhere you go. Built for reliability, the OWC Envoy Pro Electron is waterproof, dustproof, and crushproof. Never worry about the storage and safety of your work again. Find the new OWC Envoy Pro Electron and all your storage needs at macsales.com/rockstars. I'm a huge fan of using iZotope plugins for my music and podcast productions. In fact, you're hearing Ozone and RX on my voice right now in this podcast episode. And now you can get access to all the iZotope plugins through the new subscription options. For only $24.99 per month, Music Production Suite Pro is designed for the serious recording, mixing, and mastering engineer, putting the finishing touches on music, film, and podcasts with fully pro versions of Ozone, RX, Neutron, Nectar, Neoverb, tonal balance control, visual mixer, and more, including free plugin updates. Or for only $19.99 per month, you can join Producers Club to get a suite of industry-leading production, mixing, and mastering plugins, custom presets, royalty-free samples, production courses, and more. Start your 7-day free trial subscription now, or go to iZotope.com/rockstars and use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off any individual plugin purchase. Coupon not valid for subscriptions or Spire Studio. Let's see, talk about some of the logistics of managing a live session. We talked a little bit about, mic technique and stuff, but are there other elements? Are there logistics of just sort of getting the band into the right frame of mind and making sure that the performance is excellent?
Yeah. So typically what happens is when a singer-songwriter comes to the studio, we end up arranging the song for the artist. So we'll decide, okay, if it needs drums or not, or a flute or a violin, 2 guitarists, a backing vocalist. So we'll take those calls internally at the studio. And so when the artist comes, we actually have to practice the song together first, because we are playing on all these sessions as well.
Right.
So the artist comes typically in the morning at around 9. From 9 to 10, we're sharing the arrangement we have. Like if there's reharmonization to their song, if there's changes in structure, we'll share all of those things at that point. And then all of us will practice the song together for about an hour. And then we'll just start recording. And the biggest difficulty, since we we adhere to that one take live recording rule so strictly. We don't do overdubs and we don't do multiple takes and we don't comp them. So if somebody messes up in a live recording, we start the whole thing again.
Right.
So it is a surprisingly tedious process because, I mean, everybody who's ever played in a band knows when you play a song, one dude is going to go off somewhere doing something else. So to get that one perfect recording takes maybe, 8, 10, 12 recordings of that same song to really get it right. But it's so rewarding in the end because, you don't have to comp in anything. You don't have to overdub anything. That is what you have played and that's what you have performed. So that's the biggest logistic, is just, working together, getting that one perfect take down. And, if there are small discrepancies in tone, or somebody's made a small mistake, but the rest of it is fine, those are compromises that we have to make. Because we wanted to, replicate that experience of listening to a band live, which is why we do everything as one take live recordings. Because if you were to hear us live, this is exactly what we would sound like. We don't use, we don't have additional samples. There's no loops playing in the back. Everything you hear is live. So it's a supremely rewarding endeavor to focus on this idea of live sessions, but it is really tiring because it takes us to do 6 hours, 5 hours to do one song. Wow.
Well, and that's also because you guys are starting from something brand new. You work with the artists and you guys are learning it and all learning how to play it together. When I was doing stereo sessions, for example, it was a little different approach where if the band comes in, then the band has already done that so that they're, ready to just perform it as is. But it's fun. It's fun to do live stuff. What about the video side of things? One of the ways that we kept it really simple was I said, forget fancy cameras. That took forever. We tried it at first. I worked with videographers and, we'd shoot one video and then I'd wait a month for them to edit it and hit it back. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Can't we just use iPhones? And so we started shooting using iPhones and we had everybody. In fact, everybody who was at the party was encouraged to break out their phone and do a shot at the same time and then turn them all in. And there was for a while, there was a service called Viclone, if I'm remembering the name right, that would collect all the iPhones through the internet so that you had all these shots at a party for each song, which was kind of fun. But, that just sped up the process for me of editing, because it was just simpler video. What did you decide for video? Are you guys using high-end cameras? Do you use multiple cameras? Do you edit later or try and do live switching?
Yeah, so we do use fancy cameras, but I think I adopted the exact same rule that you're explaining, which is keep it simple. So the idea was, since this is a one-take live recording audio, why not the video also be a completely one-take unedited video as well?
Like one camera?
One camera, freehand, I mean, on a gimbal, obviously, but just one camera shooting the entire thing in one take. So there's no cuts, which further draws, I mean, the intention is to draw the viewer into being like, there's no random cuts, showing you the close-ups of the hands of the keyboardist or the close-up of the vocalist. There's no cuts at all in that one live shot. So the live recording audio that we do is also the exact same live recorded video of that session as well. So for my job as editing the video, I just need to put titles and color grade it. So that's how I kept it simple, is that I wanted it to be a one-take live recording audio along with a one-take unedited sort of, single master take of video as well. So every single live session that you see, if you go to our channel, would be just this one continuous take with no cuts in between.
Yeah, that's cool. I had another guest on the podcast as well, John Cunaberti, and he also did started a channel called the One Mic Sessions, where
I've seen, I've actually heard of them. I've seen some of his sessions as well. Really, really cool stuff.
Yeah, pretty cool. And he's doing the single camera shot, but also a single stereo microphone and trying to combine that. And when Al Evans joined us on the podcast too, he talked about doing some recordings like that. So I love that. I think it's really fun to get into that simplicity in recording and just try and really focus on the performance as much as possible. Well, so let's see. You are also producing a lot of records out of your studio and working with bands in that capacity. What do you feel is the role of a producer in the studio?
I think producers fall in one of two categories, or both, quite frankly. But you're either a technical producer, or you're a creative producer, or you're both. And what I mean by that is that if you're a technical producer, your main skill set that you're offering to the artist is your ability to program instruments, for example, your ability to go into a studio with the artist and know your audio engineering techniques and know your miking techniques and know the logistics and the technicality of how to record a song. I think that's the role of the technical producer. Then you have the creative producer. The creative producer comes in on board with the artist, dissects the song, the melody, the harmony, reharmonizes it if they think that, these verses sound too similar, but thematically the second verse is talking about something different. So why don't we have different chords for the second verse? The creative producer, I think, comes more in that capacity to assist the artist in helping them realize what their song is capable of from a compositional standpoint.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to, whenever it comes to producing an artist, to know which role are you relying on more. Because I know I've worked with some artists where they've got their entire arrangement ready. They know exactly what they want from the song. My role then becomes as a technical producer to facilitate the manifestation of this person's idea of what their song sounds like into reality. Getting the right people for the job, getting the right drummer to record, tuning the drums right according to the song. That's the technical producer, I think. And you need slightly different skill sets for both, I think. And for the creative producer, it always helps if you are a musician as well, because if you're purely a technical producer, you don't really have to be a musician in order to be a technical producer too. So the creative producer will rely on musicality and understanding a bit about music theory and understanding about structure and changes, and these are the core components of the creative producer. And I think it's always important to make that role clear for yourself if you're working with a new artist, because you can also charge accordingly. Because if the expectation that the artist has is, okay, I just need you to get these ideas that I have and program all the drums for it, I know exactly what the groove is supposed to be, but I don't know how to do it, I want you to do it. That requires a different quotation to give to the artist than if your responsibility is also to rearrange the song, figure out the instrumentation and then program them. So for a sort of new producer, I think working with an artist, it's important to know, are you playing both roles? Are you playing only one of the roles? Because then you can charge accordingly and it's justified as well. I think I wish I'd known that earlier, because there were projects in which I think I did a lot more than I'd signed up for, not knowing that I'm also fulfilling some of these creative producer roles that when the initial conversation was just to do with the technical side of things. So
it's not that the difference is just sort of like in this conceptual level. It also translates into, you're going to spend a lot more time on something because of the requirements, right? So you're wanting to arrive at what you think is appropriate to charge based on how much time and energy and input you're going to have to put into each of these.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know about well, I think it's probably different in the States, but in India, the role of a music producer is slightly elusive. Like, what exactly do you do? Do you just tell me to play it this way as opposed to that way? I mean, you know what I mean?
Right.
Like the role of the producer is slightly ambiguous, and that's the way it's been designed. It's been designed in a manner where it's slightly weird. Like, what exactly do you do? And I think for the most part, the role of a producer is kind of like what a director does in a movie, right? It should be music director, I guess, but I think there's a lot of confusion as to what a producer does
Yeah.
to an artist, to a song. And that ambiguity can lead to a lot of conflict with artists, I think.
I think I just figured out what the definition is, or how to describe it.
Right.
I've been eating vegan recently, so I'm not eating eggs. But when I have in the past, and I remember you break an egg and then you put the egg into a bowl, and then a piece of the shell falls down into it, and then you reach down with your finger to try and get the shell out. But wherever you put your finger, that piece of shell just moves a little bit out of the way. That's what the definition of the producer is, right?
That is, I couldn't have said it better myself. That's freaking perfect. Because it is like that. It is elusive. There is no strict mandate it's not a prescriptive role, right? A drummer has a prescriptive role. Your job is to play the drums. A guitarist has a prescriptive role. Your job is to play the guitars.
So what about the engineer?
Producer, yeah, I think so. I think as a technical producer, it's also your job to engineer, if that's going to be the role you're playing, because the engineer's job otherwise is to just figure out the best way to capture whatever needs to be captured, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the engineer's responsibility. The engineer is not really there to tell you, hey, that take was flat, do it again. Technically, that's not under the purview of the engineer, I think. That's under the purview of the producer or the artist themselves. The artist should be able to listen to their own take and be like, okay, that's flat, let's do one more. That definition of what a producer is supposed to be is elusive, which means you have to kind of create your own definition of what kind of producer you are going to be to an artist, because there's no checklist for that.
Which one do you like to be?
I personally like being both. In every of my albums that I've produced, I've worked on a creative capacity and on a technical capacity, and I've played on every single of my albums that I've produced. So for me personally, since I record almost everything at my studio, I also engineer all the sessions because I know my skill and I know my space and I know my stuff. So when I'm working with an artist, I'll work very closely with the artist from a compositional and creative capacity. Then I'll play and track guitars and bass on the songs, and I'll engineer the sessions for vocals or for drums or for whatever needs to be done as well. So it's super easy for me, I think. Let me rephrase that. It's a lot of hard work, but it's easier for me, I think, because it's all under my control, which means if I fuck up, then that's on me. That's on nobody else. I'm accountable to that final result that comes out, because I can't blame, that was the engineer's fault, he didn't mic the vocalist right, or there was a phase problem in the drums, which is why it's sounding thin. That's all on me now.
Okay, cool. Let me get specific about some records that are in your playlist. And Rockstars, we put together a music playlist that you can find in the show notes, and then we'll include a link over to the YouTube channel as well, because there's going to be a bunch of stuff you want to see there. One of the tracks, let's see if I can say this right, Nadi Ka Bena Prayasi Ki Zolf Se Age Mucked. I don't even know how I'm saying that, but what do you call, there's a certain kind of vocal scatting style that's very Indian in there. And then there's also a really lovely Indian sort of Middle Eastern melodic scale that goes with it. And I wonder if you could talk about that project and what your role was in that.
Yeah, can you say the name again? I don't think
Nadi Ka Bena. It's like it's got that kind of vocal style in there. I don't even know what it's called, but I love it. It sounds like somebody's vocally imitating the tabla drums. It's okay if you don't remember the specific track, but do you know what I'm talking about stylistically?
Yeah. I think there's an artist called Aditi Ramesh who I think did that. What you're referring to right now. The beauty, again, I think that goes back to why India is such an amazing place to make music, is because it's at such a convergence point of so many different kinds of cultures of music. There's such a big Western influence of music in India, because we listen to a lot of American pop music and jazz and rock, neo soul.
Yeah.
But then we have this long tradition of Hindustani classical music, and it's in those mergers of fusion where I think the most interesting stuff happens. So I think that particular project where it's this vocal scatting, which is not really jazz scatting, because that's a very different stylistic delivery.
Yeah.
this is percussive and it's got a lot of rhythms happening in it, but it's played in a style which is very modern and easy to listen to. So getting that balance between the Indian sort of sound with that Western sound becomes then the main priority of the producer to try to figure out, because it's very easy to make something sound novel for the sake of sounding novel, and that's a really tough line to draw, where if it's a purely if it's a jazz combo or a jazz trio set and they're all playing Hindustani classical music, that would sound weird.
Right.
Because it would just sound like, oh, there are these jazz cats who are just trying to play something Indian for the sake of it. So it's really important to skirt that line with treading that line really carefully and making sure if you're adding that Indian element into the song or that Western element to the song, it helps the song and not the performer, because it's very easy to be swayed by the virtuosity of the performer as like, oh my God, he can do that, which is why he's added that into the song, versus does the song really need that? Songs, and I mean, generally compositions shouldn't be, at least I don't think that a song should be like a show off, contest where look what I can do, which is why I did all of those things. That's why it's in the song, versus like, does it really belong in the song? And I think that's an important distinction to make.
And I think that ultimately just comes from a gut feeling about it. You sort of have to identify what's important and the focus of the song you're working on, and make sure you're not stepping on those toes, whether it's the vocal or the singer or the melody. Rockstars, I am super excited to announce that I'm doing a full studio remodeling here at the Toy Box Studio, headquarters of recording studio Rockstars. I'm working with the amazing studio designer Carl Tatz to upgrade my control room to a Phantom Focus mix room, and have also been improving the sound of my entire studio room by room. The first time I heard one of Carl's Phantom Focus mix rooms featuring the PFM HD 1000 series monitors, I was completely blown away. It felt like I was listening to three-dimensional sound where I could close my eyes and reach out and touch the instruments, with crystal clear bass radiating from a 50-foot wall of pure marble. It was by far the best sounding mix room monitors I have ever heard anywhere. Check out my complete interview with Carl Tatz on episode 50 of the podcast and discover the secret to massively improving your monitor setup at carltatzdesign.com/mixroom-mentor. What do you want to say about some of the melodies and the scales that come from India and where you are versus the Western scales? What can you talk a little bit about the differences of those two things?
Yeah, sure. Surprisingly, my name Raag actually means like a melodic framework. So in Indian classical music, you would have like Raag Desh is like akin to like saying that, oh, this is the Phrygian mode or Ionian mode. It's a very specific kind of scale. There's another scale called Raag Todi. So each of these words would be sort of prefixed by the word Raag, which means melody.
So your parents knew all along what you were supposed to do with your life.
My parents like sealed my fate when I was born. They knew I had no option but to be a musician.
Right.
But despite my name being Raag, and actually surprisingly, my sister's name is Jazz.
Nice.
So we've got Raag and we've got Jazz as the two kids in the house. And even though my name is Raag, I don't really do too much in the Hindustani classical style. And my sister Jazz doesn't really like jazz music much. So I think we compensated each other's names on each other's behalf.
That's perfect.
But that's fundamentally the framework, is that just like in Western music scales, you've got the major scale, minor scale, melodic minor, harmonic minor, and then you've got, the modes. You've got Phrygian, you've got Locrian, you've got Dorian, Mixed Lydian, and then you've got those sort of altered modes. You've got, a Lydian augmented with the sharp 5 as well. The rags there are a lot of rags, and unlike the Western sort of idea of how melodies are used, rags typically have some sort of spiritual association to it and some sort of time association to it. Like certain rags can only be played and performed in certain times of the day, because it's coming from this, again, it's a classical tradition, right?
Wow.
So it's got some amount of spiritual heft to it, and you'd have certain rags that can only be performed at certain times of the day. So you'll have a certain Raag that can only be performed at night. You'll have a certain Raag that can only be performed in the morning. So
which Raag can only be performed at the Grammys?
Hopefully Sethi will be up there soon.
That'll be yours, right? The Raag Sethi.
Hopefully that'll be up there soon. But in the meantime, we'll have to make do with all the billions of Raags that are out there. And I think it's a cool concept that a certain scale can only be played at a certain time of the day.
Yeah, very cool.
Which doesn't exist. Yeah.
So, but you said there's so many. You guys must be busy just switching from one Raag to another all day long.
Yeah, and that's the sort of that's the role of the improviser. Raag, I mean, Hindustani classical music is heavily improvised based. So it's kind of like jazz music. With the standard, you'll have the head being played, and then you'll have the A section and the B section, and they'll just be solos, right? And then they'll come back to the head in the end, in a jazz standard.
Yeah.
Hindustani music is similar that way. They have a composition or an intro that establishes the Raag, and then the rest of the song is just improvising on that Raag for like 20 minutes straight, and then they come back to it in the end. So, surprisingly, it's not that different. Again, I'm not an expert in Hindustani classical music, but from what I know, that's how it works.
Yeah. Well, so my mentor, Brad Jones, who's he was the first engineer who really taught me recording, along with Robin Eaton over at Alex the Great. Brad went and did a solo tour of India. I think he spent a month traveling there, and he went to go see classical Indian performances. And he described it as, these incredibly complex time signatures. And he said it was remarkable how the audience really understood what was going on with the music, so that the musicians would go and circle around, and then every once in a while, these, contrasting time signatures would come together and land together, and the whole audience would just light up, because it's kind of like what you said. I think the head and the improvisation, and then coming back to the beginning.
Yeah.
And I feel like I experienced that in jazz too. It's always remarkable when a jazz ensemble circles back after this wild improvisation, and then they play this well scripted part together again, and you're like, how did they even know that was where they were in the song?
Yeah, it's very, very similar to that. And as you were saying about your friend who sort of watched a lot of these classical performances, there's a big emphasis on melody and rhythm, because Hindustani music does not have a strong functional harmony base, right? Like I said, it'll pretty much be one chord sort of play through the whole 20-minute slot, but they'll be doing some crazy stuff with time signatures and crazy superimpositions of rhythms. Polymetric stuff is happening, and they do a lot of actually, there's another similarity there. Like in jazz, like when you have during the improv section, you'll have like two soloists, like trade fours or trade eights. In Hindustani classical music, there's a concept called jugalbandi, which is the idea of each of those two soloists sort of kind of trying to outdo each other through like virtuosity. So it's kind of similar in that way too. Like you'll trade fours in jazz, and you'll do a jugalbandi in Hindustani music.
I'm going to say that back to you. It's the juggle bandy, which is like it's a battle of the bands. Yeah. Juggling two bands against each other.
Exactly.
Right? Okay, cool, man. Well, that's pretty wild. What was one of the most unusual sessions you've had yet in your studio? What was one of the most unusual recording experiences you've had? Anything that was a lot of fun or stands out?
I think we're going to be, it's not out yet. It's actually, we're going to be putting out this session in the end of March.
It'll be out by the time this comes out.
Oh, yeah, perfect. Okay, so this session would have already come out by then. But we did a session with an artist called Anushka. And in this session, we had the upright bass. So I was playing the upright bass for the very first time. So recording the upright along with a clarinet, drums, violin, acoustic guitar, electric guitar, backing vocals. I think that was probably the most interesting live session I've ever done, because especially, again, managing Blade with the with the double bass was something that we really had to figure out how to nail.
Yeah.
And it was only after the session I read up on this technique of recording the upright, especially for live sessions, which I should have done for the session, obviously, which I didn't. But we just used a small diaphragm condenser for the upright, and then I saw this article online which said that for a lot of these jazz trios, because the upright is mainly performed in a live setting for the most part. They take a 57 and wrap it around in a towel and sort of slot it in below the bridge of the upright.
Yeah.
So it just sort of stands there. So you get really good rejection. You get that sort of low end as well as the attack from the strings. And I was like, I wish I should have read that before going to the session. But I think that was probably the most interesting session, because having a trumpet, like having a brass instrument in that session, in that room, realizing just how loud that instrument is. So we were trying to figure out ways in which the trumpet player had to literally he was looking away towards the wall to minimize the amount of just sheer SPL coming out of that instrument. So we had to really be creative in terms of how we placed the trumpet in that particular room. But I think that was probably the most fun we've had doing a recording session.
Do your fingers still hurt from playing the upright bass?
I have blisters that I didn't know it exist. Like the last time I got blisters on my fingers was like when I started playing guitar, and now to see blisters on my hand again, like I'm rejoicing at it, but it's also super painful. So like if you think you're a bassist and can play the upright bass, that is 100% not true.
Yeah, so that is one of those tricks for recording an upright bass that can really help. Is essentially, Rockstars, you are putting a microphone underneath the bridge pointing up towards the fretboard, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so it's like as close as it can be to the bass, so you're hopefully getting proximity effect. And the brightness of that mic is pointed up towards the fingerboard, so you're hopefully getting the sound of the fingers on the strings. And it's remarkable how much bleed of the rest of the room will get on. If you just put a mic in front of the upright, you're just going to hear everything else in the room. It's like the vocal mic, right? So there's I pulled this one up right now. Ear Trumpet Labs is a company that makes some really cool looking mics that look like they're built out of plumbing parts, brass plumbing pipes and things like that, and fittings.
Right.
And they have a mic called the Nadine, which is intentionally designed to just fit right underneath the bridge of the bass. And I feel like Chris Wood was he had that with the Wood Brothers when he came in and recorded with me at Bonnaroo. So if, I figure if he's using it, I hope I'm not wrong about him using that particular mic, but if he's using it, it's probably a good choice,
I got to check that out for sure.
Yeah, but you're saying just wrap a 57 in a towel, so that kind of like blocks out some of the bright frequencies and maybe keeps it from bumping around and helps it just sort of sit wedged underneath the bridge.
Exactly. It acts like a shock mount to the mic, and you sort of just wedge it in with. So you have to find a towel that sort of fits that space of the bridge below the upright. But once you sort of fit it in, it's pretty secure and it sounds surprisingly good. And but to think that something as simple as that was the solution that we were looking for, and there was no other option. And unfortunately, we ended up recording with that small diaphragm in front of the upright. But like you said, it pretty much was a room mic again for the rest of the sound. So going forward, at least for the live sessions, that's the way to record. And since I had the upright for the day, we also made one video which will be coming out soon about like how to record an upright. And we used 3 different techniques, one with an Omni mic, one with a cardioid, and one with a figure 8 ribbon as well, pointed at different parts of the upright to hear like how the different polar pattern as well as the different mic produce the kind of tone that you may be looking for. So that's a video that hopefully will come out soon.
Very cool. Yeah, if you're recording just a bass by itself, it's a lot easier. You can just put a large diaphragm condenser out in front of it and get a natural tone. But doing it with the band is really tricky. When I did a jazz band all in one room in my studio, same problem. I took I think I had the Mic Tech C5 small diaphragm condenser, and I like literally pointed it right at the fingers on the strings. I'm like, I still don't hear the bass. Like, what is going on here? You know?
And you'll hear everything else though. That's the worst part.
Yeah. So it's definitely challenging. In another solution I did was he did have a pickup in his bass, and so I ran that to an amp and put that in the amp room, and that helped a lot too.
Yeah, that will definitely help. And while we were just doing the test of like recording upright, we put a large diaphragm at like where you normally put a large diaphragm, but like maybe 6 inches, 7 inches away. Like 3 feet, 4 feet away from the bridge, between the bridge and the fingerboard, and just switching it from cardioid to omni made a huge difference, because the upright is one of those instruments that where the space really matters for that low end.
Yeah.
So the moment we switched it to an omni, it made the sound so much more like fuller and a lot more 3-dimensional as well. So if you're recording sort of upright, I think omni is sort of the way to go.
Well, and if you have an omni mic, you can actually get it closer to the instrument because you don't have the proximity effect.
Well. Yeah.
So that's one of those fun discoveries with omni mics that I think is worth all of us experimenting with, is put a mic in omni and just get it as close as you possibly can to something. Like even an acoustic guitar, just put it like right where the fingers are picking the strings and be amazed at how much detail you get like that.
Mm-hmm.
And just because it's so close, you may actually surprisingly get some isolation out of it.
Yeah, that's true.
Want to know how to record killer drums in your studio? Rockstars of Drums will show you how to record, edit, and mix pro-sounding drums with examples from Nashville session drummers in a Grammy-winning studio. Want to know how to master your own music at home? Rockstars of Mastering will show you how with plugins in your DAW so that your music will sound awesome when you finish your mixes. And if you're looking for a step-by-step solution for a pro mix that won't take years to learn, Ultimate Mixing Masterclass with Craig Alvin will show you a proven method for creating Grammy-winning quality mixes that you can apply in your home studio right now. Or if you just need to learn the fundamentals of a great mix, then register for my free course, Mixmaster Bundle, to get great mixes using simple, free plugins. Get started now making your best record ever at recordingstudiorockstars.com/academy. Use the code ROCKSTAR to get 10% off any course in the Academy for a limited time. So, Raag, what do you love about recording music? What do you just love about doing the studio and recording?
Man, I was hoping you wouldn't ask me that question. What do I love most about recording? Honestly, I like the process of working with people. I'm one of those sort of producers that, I'm not very good with MIDI, for example. Because I have a studio and I have the instruments and I have the people who can play those instruments, I almost never end up using any MIDI layers on any of the tracks that are produced. And so I think that's what I love the most. I love the fact of sitting with sitting with people, and working together to come to this common idea of this abstract concept called music, getting on the same page of what groove should sound best for this particular song. It's such a collaborative process. At least it used to be a collaborative process. I know right now with sort of mixing in the box and sort of, with how good VSTs and, plugins are, you can make an entire band's recording from the comfort of your laptop too right now.
Right.
But there's just something magical about working with people and creating something together. And I think that's the part that I enjoy the most. I enjoy the working with the people and, bouncing ideas off of them and collectively coming to, like, when you hear something together and you both look at each other at the right point and you're like, oh, that was cool. It's those moments which you don't get if you're doing everything by yourself in the box. And that's the part that I love the most. I love working with an artist and figuring out what makes them tick, why have they written this song, exploring ideas of harmony with them and seeing, why should the chords of the second verse be different from the first verse, which I know in pop music, that's not how it goes, but why we should do that. And they'll also understand that, and they'll have an aha moment. I'll have an aha moment. And it's that lovely collaboration process.
Right. You put enough aha moments together and everybody's just going, ah, ha, 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 laughing.
They're just laughing, and no music is made after that.
As far as the MIDI instruments goes, when was the last time you ever tried to have a beer and a coffee and a conversation with your MIDI instruments? It's just not the same as hanging out with your buddies after you take.
Yeah, it's you're constantly adjusting parameters in the MIDI instrument, and it's just like you're not the same thing as a real instrument. Like you're constantly you're looking at least as far as I'm like how I've worked with. And to be fair, I know some really talented programmers who can make a drum, like a programmed drum sound incredibly realistic. But when I'm working with MIDI, I'm always looking at the gaps of MIDI rather than the benefits to me. So whenever if I'm programming a drum groove on MIDI, I'm always looking at, this is what a drummer would be able to bring that I currently can't program into MIDI. And programming MIDI for me is always counterintuitive, because it's like it's adding imperfections to a perfect thing.
Right.
You record the drum groove, you quantize it, and then you select all of that MIDI information and humanize it a little bit so that it's slightly off. And it's so weird to think of it that way, that it's taking something perfect and adding the imperfections that make it musical.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing. I mean, I love programmed stuff, but I like programmed stuff that's not trying to imitate a real instrument.
Exactly. Yeah,
I love
take the benefits of the programmed instrument, right? I mean, for electronic music and for EDM and for this new age, this modern jazz sound, which has these really like heavy synth sounds and all, it sounds so good. But the moment it's trying to, like you said, be a trumpet line or a drum kit or a guitar sound, it doesn't do it for me yet.
What's the EDM scene like there?
Oh, EDM is pretty big here. We've got some pretty big EDM festivals in India, and I'm not a big EDM fan, to be honest. But I know there are some pretty big EDM festivals here in India, and there's a big EDM crowd, because, I mean, when you've got 1.5 billion people, you kind of need to make them stress.
Wow.
Like, the best way to relieve stress is just getting them together in a room and dancing. So
yeah, that's great. And then just to give some context, Rockstars, here in the US, 328 million compared to 1.5 billion in India. Yeah. That's quite a difference. A lot more people to make music, a lot more people to enjoy music. Dude, it's been fun hanging out with you on the podcast, man. What a cool,
likewise,
cool insight into your world and this, the other side of the earth, which is great. Thank you for joining us. I'm guessing it's probably late in the day for you. It's about noon for me here in Nashville.
Yeah, it's midnight right now over here in India.
Oh man, we're exactly on other sides of the globe.
We're literally 12.5 hours apart, yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing I can thank the internet for. So got one closing question for you, Raag. This one is hypothetical, but you're going to go back and take the Wayback Studio machine and you go back in time and find yourself, I don't know, maybe you don't have to go back that far. Maybe you're only going back 2 years, but maybe you're going back to like starting music and stuff. If you could go back in time and give yourself one bit of advice and just say, listen, Raag, this is the single most important thing you should know to be a rock star of the studio yourself. What advice would you like to go back and tell yourself?
Ooh, that's a good question. Let me think. I remember reading, what is that? The Recording Engineer's Handbook by Bobby Osinski, I think.
Yeah, Bobby's great.
Right? And I remember I read this one particular quote from that book after I built the studio and after I sort of like created that. And it said that if you were to break up like 100% of the things that contribute to sound, he said that 50% is the instrument and the musician. It's sometimes more, sometimes less, but it's always the biggest contributing factor to the sound. It's the instrument, the quality of the instrument, and the quality of the musician. 20% is the mic placement. 20% is the space. And only the last 10% is the gear, what mic, what preamp it's going to, etc. And I wish I had known that better when I was younger, and not lusting after gear, because better gear is not going to make you a better recording engineer. And and everybody, I think everybody who's recorded music knows that the gear does not necessarily deter. It can help. It's that last 10%, but you don't have to have the best mic in the world. You don't have to have the best interface in the world to make great music.
Yeah.
And I wish I'd known that more viscerally in my understanding of audio engineering, that my mic placement is more important than the mic. The room is more important than the preamp it's going to. The musician I'm hiring to play the session is more important than all of those combined.
Yeah,
so
that's a big one.
I think that's something that I wish I had known better when I had started off, is that the gear, while it's important, having a Neve 1073 is definitely a cool thing to have in the studio, but it's not something that's the largest contributing factor to the sound.
Yeah, that's great advice. The musician, instrument, absolutely. But let's also just, like you said, remind everybody it's okay. It is fun to unbox that new gear, though. It really is fun.
It is so much fun. It is so much fun. And, I like to add one more thing to that. I think the one thing I wish I knew, or I wish that somebody would have told me, is that my first project or whatever I was recording doesn't have to be perfect. And you don't need to hold yourself to that standard, because you are learning, and the process of learning is imperfection. So, I remember for that first track that I was producing, I made the vocalist re-record their parts again and again and again, because it was microtonally off or just slightly sharp here. And, in my head, I was like, no, it has to be perfect or I'm not releasing this. And I don't think as a producer or as an engineer, you need to be too caught up in that. It's okay. Just put content out there. The only way you'll get better is by putting more and more content out there.
I think you just had a new studio and you didn't want to go home. I think that's what it was.
It could be that for sure.
Okay, Raag.
At the expense of my vocalist, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us on Recording Studio Rockstars, man. What a pleasure. I hope I get to come visit someday and see what your world looks like. Let the Rockstars know how they can find out more about you. Where would you like them to go check out your YouTube channel? And then, of course, a reminder, Rockstars, we've got a playlist of music in the show notes. You can click through there as well. But where should everybody go? What if they happen to be in your part of the world and they're ready to come make their next record?
Yeah, you can first of all find all the live sessions that we've done on our YouTube channel. You just type Compass Box Music and you should find it. We have a website called compassboxstudio.com. If you want to see the work that I've produced, we have a projects page on our website that shows all the work that we've done so far. So you can look at that. And if you're ever in Ahmedabad, India, please do come visit me at Compass Box Studio. It's on Google Maps. And Lij, if you're ever going to be in India and ever going to be in Ahmedabad, which is a slim chance, I'm guessing, but if you're ever in this side of the world, please let me know, and I'll get you a beer for sure.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. I'll even have a chai tea. Why not?
Chai tea latte.
Chai tea latte. Dude, thanks so much for hanging out with us. Look forward to meeting you in person. Rockstars, thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you soon, dude. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. And if you want more free content from Recording Studio Rockstars, all you have to do is go to rsrockstars.com/email. Again, that's rsrockstars.com/email to enter your name and email, and I'll keep you in the loop with articles, videos, podcast updates, and even free gear giveaways for your studio. Just look for the link in the show notes below. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lij Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our amazing sponsors who help make this episode possible. OWC, Carl Tatz Design, Spectra 1964, Isotope, and JZ Microphones. Remember to use the coupon codes ROCK10 at isotope.com/rockstars for 10% off any plugin purchase, or start your 7-day free trial subscription to get access to all their plugins. Or use the coupon ROCKSTARS at jzmic.com for 20% off the pop filter for a limited time. And don't forget to learn how to get your monitoring just right at carltatzdesign.com/mixroom-mentor. And finally, use the coupon code ROCKSTAR for 10% off any course at Recording Studio Rockstars Academy for a limited time. We'll include all these links in our show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko, Braden Stremming, and John Richardson, for additional podcast and video production. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.